It began with silence, the kind of silence that makes even machines hesitate, the kind that feels alive, as if space itself were holding its breath, waiting for something to move, waiting for something to make sense. In the great chamber of the Galactic Council, 1,000 holograms flickered above curved metal seats, each one showing the faces of alien leaders from across the stars, some scaled and cold, some furred and shaking, others with glass-like skin that shimmered in fear. The noise of debate had stopped hours ago, now only static filled the hall, and in the center of the room the High Speaker of the Council stood motionless, his long silver robes dragging against the floor, his voice dry when he finally spoke. "We have lost contact with the Yildar system," he said. "All of it." The words seemed to echo forever. No one replied, no one even moved, because no one understood how an entire empire's fleet could vanish without a sound, without a signal, without a scream. The screens around the chamber flickered again, showing the last known transmission. The sound of heavy interference filled the air, and then a voice, low and trembling, spoke through the static. "They're here?" It said 2 words, then nothing. The hologram froze on the image of a pilot's wide eyes just before the feed cut to black. Someone whispered from the back rows, "They? Who are they?" But no one dared to answer, because deep inside, even without confirmation, everyone already knew who could make entire fleets disappear and still remain unseen. The name passed quietly from delegate to delegate, spreading like infection. Humans. The word itself had power. It carried both awe and dread, because humanity had been gone for decades, or so they had been told, their worlds closed, their fleets silent. They had left the council long ago after wars no one dared to mention. Many believed they had turned inward, gone extinct, or simply given up the will to fight. But now it seemed the ghosts had returned. The council chamber grew darker as the giant star beyond the window shifted behind the city's ringed towers. Shadows cut across alien faces, soft lights flickered beneath the floor. One of the reptilian generals from the Dravic Dominion slammed his clawed hand against the table. "This is a trick," he hissed. "No one wipes out 2,000 ships without showing their power. This is sabotage." But another delegate, an old scholar with thin, translucent skin, raised his trembling fingers. "I saw the signal," he whispered. "I saw the coordinates. They came from the edge of human space." The hall erupted with noise again. Shouts of disbelief, of fear, of denial. The High Speaker struck the floor with his staff, demanding silence. "We must confirm before panic spreads," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "Dispatch reconnaissance, and recall the frontier fleets." The order was met with silence, because everyone knew the truth. If the Yildar armada was gone, no one left in that region could answer any call. The great historian Saran, oldest among them, stood slowly from his seat near the back, his robe marked with the sigils of the First Council. He was ancient enough to remember when humans had first joined the Galactic Alliance, when they had walked these same halls and argued among the stars as equals. His voice was calm but carried weight. "I warned you this would happen," he said quietly. "We laughed when they withdrew, we mocked their silence, and yet you all forgot what they are." "A younger," Diplomat snapped. "Primitive savages, that's what they were, always fighting, always destroying." Saran's eyes glowed faintly blue as he turned toward the younger one. "And yet they are the only species who ever fought extinction itself and won. You call them savages, I call them survivors." His words hung heavy in the air. For a moment no one spoke, then one of the insectoid delegates buzzed nervously. "But why now? Why strike at Yildar? They were allies once." Saran looked at the hologram. Again, the frozen image of the pilot's last moment. "Maybe they didn't strike at Yildar," he said softly. "Maybe Yildar struck first." A soft alarm began to pulse through the council chamber, signaling new data arriving. Every eye turned toward the central display. A bright field of stars appeared. Then markers began to blink red, systems going dark one by one. Not just Yildar, but the entire border region, communication relays failing in sequence. The pattern was clean, deliberate, surgical, no chaos, no random destruction. Someone whispered, "This is impossible." But the data kept coming, energy readings so intense they broke calibration, fragments of wreckage moving at light speed, all consistent with one thing. Human weapons, old models, but far too precise to be anything else. The High Speaker's mouth fell open. They had no right to return, he muttered. They swore peace. Saran turned toward him. Peace was never the problem, he said. You assumed they were afraid to fight, but perhaps they simply had no reason to until now. The council demanded analysis, data, explanation, anything to make sense of the unthinkable, screens filled with reports from nearby colonies, broken transmissions showing burning skies, flashes of blue light cutting across orbit, strange energy signatures that matched no known weapon, ships made of dark alloy that did not reflect sensors. The aliens who saw them described only the same feeling, fear. One transmission came from a refugee transport near the border, the captain's voice shaking. They appeared out of nowhere. No warning, no words, just cold lights above us. Then our escorts vanished. Then the signal ended, silence again. The kind that feels heavy, like the end of everything. The high speaker lowered his head into his hands. What have we done? He whispered. At that moment, the council chamber's great doors opened, and a courier entered, his uniform torn, his face pale with exhaustion. He held a data core close to his chest. Message from the Rim Observatory, he said breathlessly. Visual confirmation. The council guards took the core and inserted it into the central reader. The hologram shimmered to life, showing grainy footage, distant but clear enough, a dark shape moving through clouds of debris, massive and silent, rectangular hulls marked with the faded emblem of the Terran Navy. A circle with a single star through its center. Someone gasped aloud. That design. That's centuries old. Another voice? It's them. The camera zoomed slowly, the ship's surface reflecting the light of a dying sun. Then a flash of white, and the feed ended. A heavy quiet filled the room again. The council members looked at each other, realizing what this meant. Humanity had not been destroyed or isolated. They had been rebuilding in silence, in shadows, far from the politics of the galaxy. And now they were back, stronger than ever. But for what purpose, no one knew. Some believed this was vengeance. Others thought it was warning. But Saran only shook his head. This is order, he said. They were always obsessed with order. When chaos spreads, they clean it, no matter the cost. His words sent chills through those who understood what he meant. To humans, war was not cruelty. It was maintenance, a task to be done efficiently and without emotion. The high speaker tried to regain control, his voice louder now, almost desperate. We must open communication channels, we must reason with them. But one of the aides interrupted. Sir, they don't respond. Then send a peace envoy. No envoy returns. The silence afterward was worse than any threat. Across the hall, screens continued to show system after system going dark, fleets vanishing, planets stripped of weapons but left otherwise untouched. No invasion, no colonization, just precision. Strikes like a surgeon removing infection, and then leaving. It was too calculated, too perfect. One of the younger generals began to tremble. What if they come here? The high speaker turned slowly toward him, his eyes hollow. Then we will finally learn what they call overkill, he said bitterly. Hours passed, each one heavier than the last, as the council watched the galaxy shrink in light. Reports faded one by one until the chamber itself was surrounded by darkness. Only a few bright stars remained on the map, distant and trembling. The counselors whispered among themselves, some praying, some denying reality. Saran stood apart, watching the display with the calm of someone who had seen this once before, in another age. He remembered the last time humans had been pushed too far. Wars that nearly destroyed half the known systems, and how afterward they had vanished into silence, promising never to repeat it. Yet here it was again, the cycle returning. He closed his eyes and whispered to no one. They warned us, we just didn't listen. Suddenly, a new signal appeared on the display, faint but strong enough to override all channels. Every delegate turned toward it, hoping it was a plea for mercy. The hologram crackled, and a figure appeared. Fuzzy, undefined, clearly human. The face was calm, eyes unreadable, the voice steady and almost bored. To the Galactic Council, it said, your military actions near Terran borders have been recorded, your fleets have been neutralized, your weapons disarmed, your territories secured. We request no negotiation, we require no surrender, simply compliance. Then the figure leaned forward slightly, the tone colder. You have mistaken patience for weakness? The feed cut, leaving the chamber frozen in shock. The high speaker stared at the empty hologram for a long moment before he spoke. What do they want? He whispered. Saran finally turned to face him. His expression sad. Nothing, he said softly. That's what makes it terrifying. They don't want power or tribute or control. They only want quiet skies. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Because every species there knew that peace was no longer a choice, it was an order. The alarms returned, faint red light painting the chamber walls, indicating ships entering the system, massive energy readings approaching from deep space. The council members rose in panic, shouting commands, calling for defense. But it was too late. The sensors showed hundreds of signatures, each one human, each one silent, surrounding the capital from all sides, their formation perfect, their engines cold. They didn't fire, they didn't move, they simply waited, as if daring the galaxy to make the next mistake. The council stood there, watching, hearts pounding, voices lost, and then something strange happened. The ships turned, not toward the planet but away, drifting slowly back into hyperspace, leaving behind a single message burned into every system they passed. For words written in Terran Standard, do not repeat this. The chamber stayed quiet long after the signals faded. No one dared to speak. The high speaker looked down at his trembling hands, realizing how fragile their great alliance truly was. Saran gathered his robe and whispered as he left. They called it overkill, he said. But for humans, it's just another day. And somewhere far beyond the rim, aboard one of those silent ships, a captain's voice echoed through the steel halls, calm and steady. Mission complete, she said. Prepare for next sector. Her crew acknowledged without emotion. The stars outside stretched into lines of light as the ship vanished into the dark, leaving behind a galaxy that would never laugh at Earth again, because now they understood the truth. When humanity moves, the universe holds its breath. Because what others call destruction, humans simply call Tuesday. Aboard the Terran flagship Eidolon, the air hummed with quiet precision, machines breathing softly like a sleeping beast. The crew moved in silence, each motion smooth, efficient, without waste, as if they had done this 1,000 times before. Outside the viewing glass stretched the remains of the Yildar Armada, twisted metal and drifting light, silent reminders of what had stood in their way. Yet inside the ship there was no cheering, no pride, no words of victory, only calm duty. Captain Rhea Dalton stood at the bridge, her hands clasped behind her back, eyes fixed on the glowing holomap, blue lines tracing the next coordinates. Her reflection in the glass showed a tired face, one that had seen too many battles and felt nothing for them anymore. An officer approached quietly. All hostile units neutralized. Captain, no survivors detected. She gave a small nod, her voice low, steady. Log it and continue. She turned slightly, watching her crew, young men and women born into silence, trained not to celebrate destruction but to understand it. Their faces expressionless as they worked the consoles, flickering lights painting their eyes in shades of blue and gold. The hum of the ship's core beat like a slow heart beneath their feet. Outside the stars looked peaceful, but every light held the memory of war, the kind humanity never wanted again, yet always seemed forced to fight. Rhea sipped her cold coffee, her eyes drifting to the viewport where distant wrecks spun lazily in zero gravity. They'll call it overkill, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Her second officer glanced up, a small smile forming. They always do. She nodded slowly. Then let them. We don't do this for their approval. Far below the bridge, in the lower decks, engineers walked among the glowing conduits of the power core. The heart of the Eidolon pulsed with blue light, its energy stable and perfect. Chief Engineer Kale wiped the sweat from his brow and stared at the readouts. The reactors holding steady? He said to his assistant. They never build ships like this anymore. The younger man looked nervous. Do you ever feel strange, sir, after all this? Kale paused, listening to the distant echoes of the engines. Strange? He repeated. No, I feel grateful. The galaxy still thinks we enjoy war. But they don't understand. We clean up their chaos because no one else will. His assistant didn't reply, just nodded, because there was nothing to say. In the officers' mess, the crew ate in silence, the lights dim, the air heavy with thought. Holoscreens flickered quietly in the background, showing neutral news channels from the outer colonies. Headlines flashing words like unconfirmed losses, communication failure, possible Terran activity, and every time the word Terran appeared, the room fell quieter. They didn't hate what they did. They simply accepted it, like rain or fire. An old soldier named Mace spoke from one corner, his voice gravelly. "Back in my day, we warned them," he said. "They didn't listen then, and they won't listen now." Another officer looked up. "You think the council still remembers?" Mace gave a dry chuckle. "Oh, they remember. They just wish they didn't." Captain Ria's communicator beeped softly. A voice came through. "Fleet Command requests update." She pressed a button. Sector 5 secured. 0 resistance. There was a pause, then a voice replied, "Proceed to next zone. Same protocol." She acknowledged, her tone unreadable, and ended the call. She stared out at the endless dark beyond the hull, whispering almost to herself, "How many times will we have to do this before they stop provoking us?" She thought of the council chambers, the endless speeches, the arrogance of species who had never lost their homeworld, who believed peace was permanent. She envied them in a way, because ignorance was easier than memory. Later that cycle, she stood alone in her quarters, a single light above her desk, the walls lined with old photos, Earth's blue oceans, the green valleys of Luna Base, and one of her family, taken years before the fleet's silence. She touched the frame softly, dust on her fingertips. Her reflection looked back at her, weary but resolute. A knock on the door broke her thought. "Enter," she said. Commander Voss stepped in, tall, lean, his eyes as tired as hers. "Council broadcasts are spreading. Panic," he said. "They're showing our ships again, calling us aggressors." Ria exhaled slowly. "They always need a villain, Voss. And we always fit the role," he replied. She smiled faintly. "Yes, but at least we're good at it." He walked to the viewport, staring out into the quiet space, the wreckage of alien cruisers glinting in distant light. "You ever wonder what they think when they see this?" he asked. "They see ghosts," Ria said simply. "Because they killed the humans they thought they knew, the ones who smiled and traded and believed in unity. But those people died long ago. What's left are the ones who learned to survive." Voss nodded slowly. "And survival doesn't need applause." "No," she agreed. "It needs discipline." As the ship prepared to jump, Ria stood at the helm again. The bridge bathed in soft blue light, every crew member waiting in silence. The countdown began, her voice calm, controlled. "Initiate warp." The engines flared, reality stretched, and the Eidolon disappeared into the void, leaving behind only drifting embers. The next system waited ahead. Another fleet, another confrontation, but to her, it was all the same, just another day's duty. Back on the Galactic Council's main channel, transmissions from terrified worlds flooded in, reports of Terran ships bypassing defenses without firing a single shot, simply disabling weapons, shutting down power grids, and moving on. Some called it mercy, others called it strategy. No one could understand the purpose, because humanity wasn't conquering, they were correcting. Wherever instability grew, they erased it, quietly, efficiently, without joy or cruelty. And as the Council scrambled for explanations, humanity continued forward, guided not by rage but by weary precision. On board the Eidolon, the navigation officer turned toward Ria. "Captain, next target identified, a Yildar research station. Minor resistance expected." Ria's expression didn't change. "Proceed," she said. The officer hesitated. "Captain, it's unarmed." For a brief second her eyes softened. "Then it won't resist, will it?" she replied coldly. Yet beneath her voice was something unspoken, a trace of sorrow. She knew what it meant to end something that might have been innocent. But orders were orders, and duty was heavier than guilt. Hours later, the Terran fleet emerged over a barren moon where the Yildar had hidden their research. Scanners confirmed the presence of old Terran tech stolen decades ago. When humanity had withdrawn from the galaxy, Ria stared at the readings, realizing the truth. "So that's why," she said quietly. "They were using our own weapons against us." She turned to her weapons officer. "No destruction, just disable?" "Yes, ma'am." Within seconds, beams of pure energy swept across the surface, disarming every structure without killing a single living being. The facility went dark, lights fading like dying embers. She turned away, whispering, "We are not monsters. We are caretakers who learn to stop asking permission." Later that night, if night could exist in space, she found herself walking through the silent corridors of her ship, the hum of engines the only sound. Through the window she saw the faint blue glow of distant worlds, untouched and peaceful. She wondered if those people ever looked up and thought of Earth. Did they remember that once, humanity had offered friendship before retreating into silence? Or had they erased the memory like a story no one wanted to tell? She sighed. They never understood us? She thought. They think this is power, but it's just responsibility. Back in the control room, Commander Voss was waiting, his eyes on the data stream. "We intercepted another message from the Council," he said. "They're calling for an emergency truce?" Rhea raised an eyebrow. "Truce?" she repeated. They finally realized what they're dealing with. "What should we reply?" he asked. She looked at him steadily. "Nothing. Let them think. Fear does more than words ever could." Voss nodded, though a shadow crossed his face. "We've become what they feared most." "No," she said firmly. "We've become what they made us." The ship drifted in the darkness, engines muted, waiting for new orders. Rhea stood alone again at the viewport, her reflection merging with the stars, her mind far away, remembering the time when humans laughed among alien friends, when the galaxy was full of promise, before politics, before betrayal, before silence. She whispered. "They thought our silence was weakness, but it was mercy." Her voice was almost tender. "And mercy doesn't last forever." The Eidolon's engines powered up again, the blue glow flooding the halls like dawn, crew moving in silent rhythm, every order carried out with calm precision. Outside, debris floated through the void like frozen snow. The remains of arrogance and ignorance scattered across the stars, and at the heart of it all, humanity stood unshaken, calm as stone. Their vengeance not hot and wild, but cold and professional. They didn't roar, they didn't boast, they simply worked, because to them, this was not war, this was maintenance. The universe was broken, and someone had to fix it. As the fleet vanished into hyperspace, the galaxy below whispered in fear and awe, stories spreading across systems of ships that appeared without sound, destroyed armies without emotion, and left behind silence more terrifying than any weapon. Every world wondered the same thing. What kind of species could do this and still call it a normal day? And somewhere deep within the void, Captain Rhea looked out into the endless dark, her voice calm. "Next sector," she said, and the stars bent once more, because for the rest of the galaxy, it was horror, but for humanity, it was just another Tuesday. Aboard the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council, the air was thick with fear and denial, the same kind of fear that makes even the bravest minds hide behind pride. The same kind of denial that blinds civilizations before their fall. The delegates shouted over one another, voices rising into chaos as holograms flashed red warnings across the curved walls. Systems offline, fleets destroyed, planets silent. The numbers were impossible, but the truth was harder. It wasn't the numbers that terrified them. It was who caused them, humanity, the ghosts of Earth, the ones the galaxy had forgotten, or perhaps chosen to forget, and now they were back. The high speaker slammed his staff against the glowing floor, his voice shaking with anger. "This is not confirmed. It cannot be. No species has that kind of power." But even as he said the words, his eyes betrayed the lie, because deep down, he already knew. The reports didn't lie. The recordings didn't lie. The silence didn't lie. "They're lying to us?" hissed a scaled ambassador from the Varka's dominion, his tail twitching with nervous rage. "They want to make us fear ghosts. Humanity is extinct. Extinct species don't vaporize fleets," snapped another. "Open your eyes." Across the hall, the ancient historian Saran stood quietly, watching the chaos unfold with a sadness too deep for words. He had warned them once before, long ago, when humanity left the council chambers in silence. He had said the quiet would not last forever, but no one listened, and now, as the holograms played back the last images of the Yildar fleet, burning in absolute stillness, no explosions, no sound, just ships disappearing into white light, he whispered to himself, "They learned how to fight without anger." His words were drowned by shouts. "We should strike first," cried one. "Send every fleet we have." another screamed. Do you even hear yourselves? Saran's voice finally rose, breaking through the noise. Strike first? Against what? Against who? You can't fight shadows that move faster than thought. You can't threaten those who have already seen the end of war and returned from it. The silence that followed was thick, uneasy. A silence filled not with peace but with shame. The High Speaker turned to the military advisor, a broad-shouldered being with silver armor, his voice tight. Deploy reconnaissance to their border, find out what they want. The advisor hesitated, his many eyes flicking nervously across the glowing data streams. Sir, no one who enters human space returns, sensors fail, ships vanish, even automated drones lose connection. Then send more. The speaker barked, we will not cower before myths. But his words felt empty even to him. The counselors looked at one another, seeing the same fear reflected in each other's eyes. Denial was their only armor now, a fragile wall built from arrogance and ignorance. Saran shook his head slowly. You are repeating history, he said softly. You forget the wars they ended, the empires they silenced, the peace they offered before you mocked it. The speaker glared at him. You speak as if you admire them. I don't, Saran replied. I remember them, and that's worse. Outside, on the edges of the galactic core, more systems went dark, reports streaming in faster than they could read. Colonies reduced to quiet, ships powered down mid-flight, weapons deactivated by unknown interference, but no deaths, no destruction of civilians, just silence, as if humanity was cleansing the galaxy rather than conquering it. Yet the Council refused to see the pattern. They're cowards. One delegate snarled, they hide behind machines. Another slammed his clawed hand on the table. Then we will show them fear. Saran's tired eyes turned to them. They don't fear you. They don't fear anyone. They only fear losing control, and you've already lost that. The room buzzed with tension. Every species that once called humanity weak now found themselves trembling at the mention of their name. A projection flickered to life in the center of the hall. A transmission recovered from the outer colonies. An alien commander's face appeared, pale and shaking. They disabled our defense grid without firing a shot, he said. We tried to communicate. They ignored us. They didn't speak. They just moved through us like we were dust. Behind him, the image distorted as lights flickered and went black. The signal ended. A soft hum filled the room. The speaker turned toward the communications. Officer, find me that system. You can't, she whispered. It's gone. Gone. The word echoed across the hall like a curse. Some of the younger delegates began whispering prayers. Others simply stared blankly, lost in disbelief. This can't be real, muttered one. They're just testing us. They won't come here. Saran smiled sadly. That's what they said last time, before half the galaxy burned. He paused, his voice soft but heavy. You think they're monsters, but they're human, and that's the problem. They don't destroy for pleasure. They destroy for reason, and you never understand the reason until it's too late. The speaker gripped his staff tighter, his pride and fear twisting into anger. Enough of your myths, Saran. Send word to the outer command. Mobilize all fleets. We will make them see we are not afraid. No, Saran said firmly. You'll only make them notice you. But his warning came too late, because the order was already sent, and across the stars, fleets began to move, massive armadas gathering near the border of Terran space. A show of strength, a show of fear disguised as courage. As the ships aligned, thousands of lights blinked into formation, the largest coalition since the Great Alliance War. But even as they prepared, something strange happened. One by one their systems began to fail. Communications jammed, engines flickered, navigation froze, officers screamed into broken comms. We're losing control. The last thing any of them saw was a massive shadow passing between the stars. And then, nothing, just the hum of silence again. In the council chamber, the reports came in, one after another, each more terrifying than the last. Fleets missing. No wreckage, no survivors, only fragments of data. Brief flashes of blue light and faint human transmission codes. The speaker's face drained of color. How are they doing this? He demanded. They shouldn't have this kind of reach. Saran answered quietly. They don't need reach when they have understanding. Understanding of what? Of you, he said simply. They studied every species, every war, every mistake. They learned that fear controls faster than fire. A cold silence filled the room again as a new hologram appeared. It wasn't from their own systems. It was from the humans. The signal hijacked every frequency in the chamber. The hologram flickered and resolved into a human figure. A woman standing tall, calm, dressed in dark uniform. Her eyes sharp but emotionless. Her voice steady and clear. To the Galactic Council, she began, "You have crossed into secured Terran zones. You have deployed fleets against neutral systems. You have violated the silence we built to protect you. This was your warning. There will not be another." And then the image faded, leaving nothing but the faint hum of the projector. The speaker sank into his seat, his hands trembling, the chamber filled with whispers. She said, "To protect us? They think this is mercy? They erased fleets and call it protection?" Saran looked down at the floor, his voice barely a breath. "That's exactly what it is." One delegate shouted, "We must appeal for peace." Another cried, "We must surrender." The speaker raised his hand. "No, we will not kneel to them." "You already have," Saran said. "You just haven't realized it yet." Hours passed. Panic grew into despair. The council chamber once filled with pride now echoed with fear. Holograms showed maps of spreading silence. Systems unreachable, worlds gone dark. One after another like candles snuffed out. The speaker looked up at the stars above the dome, whispering to himself, "They will come for us next." Saran turned away, his voice soft, heavy, full of grief. "They won't come for us," he said. "Not yet, because they don't see us as enemies anymore. They see us as problems to be solved." The words hit harder than any threat because for the first time, every alien in that chamber understood. They were no longer dealing with a rival, they were standing before something far worse, something precise, patient, and inevitable. Humanity had returned, not as conquerors, but as caretakers of a broken galaxy, and no one knew if that was mercy or doom. And as the council lights dimmed into quiet blue, the last words of Saran lingered in the air like a prophecy. "You call it war," he said softly, "but to them it's maintenance." And far away beyond the edge of known space, aboard the human fleet, the order was given, calm and emotionless. Next operation, stabilization. The engines roared to life, silent in their purpose, unstoppable in their will, and the galaxy braced itself for what came next. Not the rage of a predator, but the judgment of a species that had outgrown fear, because for humanity, this wasn't vengeance. It was duty, and the stars themselves would remember that truth. Deep inside the Terran flagship Eidolon, the corridors pulsed with a steady blue light, soft like a heartbeat that never faltered. The sound of engines was a distant hum, constant and calm, and yet beneath that calm was a quiet tension that every crew member could feel but never spoke about. They knew what was coming. They had heard the whispers. Through command lines and encrypted messages, something powerful, something forbidden, something that was never meant to exist again. The words spread softly like ghosts in the dark, Project Oblivion. The name alone carried weight, even for soldiers who had long since lost the ability to feel fear. Captain Rhea Dalton stood before the command console, her reflection flickering across the glass as streams of classified data scrolled past. Her jaw was set, her voice steady but low. Authorization. Code Rhea Delta Eidolon. Open Black Vault. The system paused, reading her voice pattern, then replied in its cold, mechanical tone, "Access granted." The vault door hissed open behind her, releasing a faint cloud of cold vapor. Inside lay a single device suspended in containment fields, a sphere no larger than her hand, glowing faintly with blue-white energy, calm, almost beautiful. Yet it carried enough power to erase a world without a sound. No explosion, no fire, just erasure. Like it had never existed, Rhea stepped closer, her eyes reflecting the light, the hum of the containment field vibrating through the air. Behind her stood Commander Voss, his face pale, his hands clenched behind his back. "You're really going to use it?" he asked, his voice heavy with disbelief. She didn't look at him. "Command has already approved." "Command?" he repeated bitterly. Or ghosts sitting behind dark screens pretending they still feel human. She turned to him slowly, her eyes tired. We don't have the luxury to feel anymore, Voss. They pushed us. They stole what we built. They forced our hand. And you think this thing fixes that? He snapped, his voice cracking. You think wiping them away makes us better? She took a slow breath, staring at the sphere again. No, it doesn't make us better, she said quietly. It keeps the galaxy from collapsing again. Her words were soft but final. Voss looked at her for a long time, then lowered his eyes. You sound like them now. Like who? The Council, he said. The ones who started this by thinking they could control everyone. She turned back toward the vault, her voice distant. They wanted control, we want peace. The difference is small, but it's everything. Her hand hovered over the control pad. She hesitated for just a heartbeat, then pressed it. Alarms echoed briefly through the ship, red lights flashing, then fading as the system accepted the command, Project Oblivion armed. The computer's voice announced coldly. Somewhere deep in the lower decks, engineers stopped what they were doing, feeling the vibration in the metal beneath their feet. A silence fell over the entire ship. Even the hum of the engine seemed to fade as if the Eidolon itself was holding its breath. Outside, through the vast window of the bridge, the stars drifted like frozen sparks, and ahead of them, a planet came into view, once part of the Yildar Dominion. Now twisted by decades of war and greed, scanners showed fortresses, weapon platforms, and energy reactors stolen from Terran designs. Rhea watched the data appear on the screen. They used our technology to build weapons against us, she said softly. They learned nothing? Voss said nothing, just stood beside her, eyes locked on. The growing world. Are we sure there's no civilians? He asked. Rhea paused. If there are, they've already made their choice, she replied, though her voice trembled slightly. We gave them years of silence to change, and they filled it with war. She gave a small signal to the operator. Execute. The word left her lips like a whisper of wind before a storm. In the deepest chamber of the ship, the containment field around Project Oblivion pulsed once, the sphere rising slowly, light gathering inside it like a small sun being born. The walls vibrated, and a low tone spread through the hull. The engineers backed away instinctively. No one needed to be told what it was capable of. Even the air seemed to turn colder. Rhea stood at the viewport as a beam of blue light shot silently toward the planet. There was no explosion, no shockwave, just a moment of perfect stillness, and then the planet began to fade. Not crumble, not burn, but fade, as if reality itself was erasing it from existence. Mountains vanished, oceans disappeared, clouds dissolved into white light, and then it was gone, replaced by a blank void that shimmered faintly before turning black again. The ship's sensors registered nothing, no debris, no atmosphere, no trace of life, just absence. The crew stood in stunned silence, no one cheering, no one speaking. It wasn't victory. It was something colder, deeper. Rhea's voice came through softly. Target neutralized. Confirm visual integrity. A quiet voice replied. Confirmed. Sector clear. Voss turned toward her slowly, his expression unreadable. You just erased a world, he said, his voice trembling. You don't even look shaken. Rhea met his gaze, her eyes hollow. Because shaking doesn't change what's done. Do you feel nothing? He demanded. They called us monsters, Rhea, and now. Monsters burn cities? She interrupted. Monsters scream and celebrate. We do neither, we clean. We erase what shouldn't exist anymore, and we move on. She turned back to the glass, the faint reflection of her face merging with the stars. That's what humans do when they've seen too much. Down in the maintenance decks, Chief Engineer Kale sat on a crate, his hands shaking slightly as he stared at the power readouts. The energy spike from Oblivion had left the ship trembling. You ever think we went too far? His assistant asked quietly. Kale gave a tired laugh. You think this is far? You should have seen what the galaxy did before we stopped talking. This isn't overkill. This is prevention. Prevention? The assistant repeated softly. Feels like ending everything. Kale looked up, his eyes heavy. Sometimes you end something to stop it from spreading. The words hung in the air like smoke. Back on the bridge, the computer's voice announced calmly. Objective complete. Awaiting new coordinates. Rhea leaned forward on the command table, her fingers tracing the edges of a star map. "What do you see when you look out there?" she asked quietly. Voss turned to her. "Possibility," he said after a moment. "And guilt?" She nodded slightly. "Guilt keeps us human?" she murmured, then stood straight again, set course for the next sector. The helmsman hesitated, his voice low. "Captain, permission to speak?" She nodded. "Yes." "Do they deserve this?" he asked, his voice almost breaking. She looked at him for a long moment. "No one deserves it," she said softly. "But we all built it." As the ship turned, the faint remains of light from the erased planet flickered across its hull. A ghost of what once was. Rhea closed her eyes for a moment, her mind drifting back to the old Earth oceans, the sound of waves, the laughter of children, the smell of salt in the air, memories from a world now distant and quiet. "You ever think about home?" Voss asked gently. She nodded without opening her eyes. "Every day. And that's why I keep doing this. Because one day maybe the galaxy will stop giving us reasons not to go back." Far away, in the dark corridors of the Galactic Council, news of the erased planet reached them. Panic erupted again, ambassadors shouting, crying, some denying the reports entirely, others demanding retaliation. But there was nothing left to retaliate against. They destroyed a world. The speaker whispered. Without sound, without warning, Saran closed his eyes, his voice heavy with sorrow. "No, not destroyed," he said. "They removed it. They cleaned it, like a scar from the universe." "How can you say that?" someone shouted. "They're insane." Saran looked up at them, his voice trembling but calm. "Maybe, or maybe they're the only ones who still know what they're doing." Back aboard the Eidolon, Rhea sat alone in her quarters, the light dim, the hum of the engines soft like a heartbeat. She poured herself a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, staring at the steam that wasn't there. She thought about the people on that planet, the soldiers who had followed orders, the engineers who believed they were protecting something, and she wondered how many of them had faces, names, stories. Then she shook the thought away, because thoughts like that were dangerous out here. Feelings slowed the mission. Guilt got people killed, and humanity could no longer afford guilt. She whispered to herself. They called it overkill, her voice barely audible. But for us, it's just maintenance. Outside, the fleet moved in silence, thousands of ships gliding through the void. No lights, no banners, just cold precision, and somewhere deep within each vessel, every soul carried the same weight, the same quiet understanding. They were not heroes, not saviors, not monsters, just caretakers cleaning a galaxy that had forgotten responsibility. And as the stars stretched before them, humanity moved forward again, steady, silent, unstoppable, because what others called horror, they called duty, and what others called the end, they simply called another day. Across the broken galaxies, silence spread like a second sunrise. No explosions, no thunder, only quiet transmissions from dying fleets and falling empires. The Galactic Council sat in the shadow of their own arrogance, the chamber dim and cold, the air thick with despair. One by one the ambassadors arrived, faces pale, eyes hollow. Their worlds had gone dark, their fleets gone missing, their defenses erased like dust from a mirror. The High Speaker stood at the center, trembling hands gripping the edge of the table. "Report," he demanded, his voice cracking. The aide's voice was small, fragile. "All 7 empires have surrendered, sir. The Terrans have ignored every message. They refuse to receive communication." The speaker's throat tightened. "Ignored?" "Yes, sir. No acknowledgement, no retaliation. They don't even answer our distress calls." The room fell into stunned silence, because what kind of conqueror ignores surrender? What kind of power defeats the galaxy and says nothing? That silence terrified them more than destruction ever could. The historian Saran stood in the back of the hall, his old eyes reflecting the dim blue light of the star map. Whole regions of the galaxy now marked in gray, labeled only neutralized. He whispered softly. "They're not fighting, they're organizing." No one seemed to hear him at first, but his words crawled into their minds. One delegate finally turned to him, voice shaking. "Organizing what?" Saran looked up. "The galaxy," he said simply. "They're rebuilding order. Their way." Gasps and shouts followed. "You think they intend to rule?" someone cried. "No, Saran said quietly. Ruling takes ego. This isn't ego. This is purpose. The speaker slammed his staff down again. Purpose? He shouted. You call this slaughter purpose? Slaughter leaves bodies, Saran replied calmly. They leave silence. In that silence, the galaxy began to crumble inward. Planets that had once fought to rule others now sent desperate pleas for protection. Trade routes collapsed, economies froze, entire populations looked to the Council for help. But the Council itself had no answers, only guilt and fear. One message appeared on the main display. A live transmission from the frontier. A trembling alien officer, blood on his uniform, smoke behind him. We tried to surrender, he said. They didn't fire, they didn't respond. They just turned off our ships, every weapon, every engine, and then they left. His eyes filled with confusion more than terror. Why? He asked, and then the screen went black. Back aboard the Eidolon, Captain Rhea watched similar transmissions flicker across her screen. Worlds surrendering to no one. Alien leaders begging for forgiveness from voices that never replied. She felt no pride, no satisfaction, only exhaustion. They're breaking faster than we expected, Commander Voss said quietly beside her. We didn't need to erase half their fleets. She shook her head slowly. Fear spreads faster than fire, Voss. Destruction isn't the goal, order is. And when order looks like terror? He asked softly. Then it's working? She answered, though her eyes betrayed the weariness she carried inside. The galaxies never understood peace unless it's forced on them. In the lower decks, crew members watched the reports in silence, faces dimly lit by the blue glow of the monitors. One young technician whispered, They're calling us gods. An older soldier sitting beside him muttered, No, they're calling us nightmares. Another voice, trembling, Maybe we're both. Their laughter was hollow, empty of joy, just a sound to fill the weight of quiet. Humanity's fleets drifted like shadows through space, massive, emotionless, unstoppable. The universe had always feared monsters, but this was something worse. Discipline without emotion, vengeance without hatred. On the Council's grand balcony overlooking the shattered skyline of their capital world, the High Speaker stood alone, staring at the horizon where the first Terran ships had been sighted days ago. Black silhouettes against a burning sky, he whispered, What do they want from us? His voice cracked. The question echoed down the marble halls, but no one answered. Because no one knew, Saran approached slowly, his cane tapping against the floor. They don't want anything, he said. They want quiet. Quiet? The speaker repeated. They've burned half the galaxy. To them, that's cleaning, Saran said. And when it's clean, they'll stop. The speaker turned to him, tears forming in his eyes. Then we beg, we tell them it's enough. They don't speak to beggars, Saran replied gently. And they don't listen to liars. Meanwhile, in orbit above that same planet, the Eidolon arrived, its hull glinting faintly in the light of the dying sun. Below them lay the seat of the Galactic Council. The same world where centuries ago, humanity had been mocked and exiled. The bridge crew stared in silence as the sensors displayed thousands of life signs, thousands of voices whispering prayers, surrender messages flooding the comms. Incoming messages from the surface. Captain, said the communications officer. Shall I connect? Rhea looked at the static-filled screens, her face unreadable. No, she said quietly. Let them speak to the silence they made. Captain, Voss said carefully. They've surrendered completely. So did the last 10, she replied. And they still built weapons in the dark. Then what are we doing here? He asked. She turned her eyes toward the planet below, finishing the message. The ship's engines shifted slightly, positioning above the planet's capital. Rhea's voice was calm as she spoke. Prepare transmission. The officer hesitated. To the Council? To everyone, she said, her eyes cold as winter. The transmission went out, reaching every surviving world, every ship, every species that could still listen. Her image appeared before them, tall, still, expressionless. This is Captain Rhea Dalton of the Terran Navy, she began, her tone soft, almost sorrowful. For centuries you spoke of peace and built weapons behind your words. For centuries you called us violent, And yet every war you fought carried our stolen designs. Every atrocity done under your flags began with technology we gave you in trust. Now your wars are over. Not because we demand it, but because we refuse to fight them anymore. There will be no conquest, no negotiation, no occupation. The galaxy will rebuild, but not under your rules. She paused, her gaze piercing through the feed. This is not revenge, it's correction. Down in the council chamber, the hologram of her face glowed above them. The delegates stared in silence, their pride stripped away. Her words were not angry, not vengeful, they were worse. They were tired of being blamed, tired of watching, tired of forgiving. And that exhaustion felt more terrifying than hate. As her image faded, the chamber erupted into cries. We must respond. Say something. But there was nothing left to say, because nothing could reach them anymore. Humanity had become untouchable, unshakable. Their silence louder than any declaration of war. On the Eidolon, Rhea turned off the transmission and stood in silence, the crew waiting, unsure of what would come next. What now, Captain? Voss asked softly. She looked out the viewport at the planet's blue curve, the lights of its cities still shining. Now we leave, she said simply. We've said enough. And if they rebuild? Then we return, she answered. We always return. That night, as the ship drifted through the edge of the system, the stars outside shimmered faintly, and the crew sat in quiet reflection, some with pride, some with guilt, some with nothing at all. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy. They had simply made it still, and in that stillness lay a strange peace, one that frightened those who had never known responsibility. The galaxy had begged for mercy, and humanity had given it, in the only way they knew, by enforcing silence. In the dark council chamber, Saran stood by the window, watching the human fleet disappear into the distance. A tear slipped down his ancient cheek, not from fear, but from understanding. He whispered. They were never gods, never demons, just custodians of chaos. Behind him, the speaker sank to his knees, broken and silent. Will they come back? He asked. Saran nodded slowly. They always come back, when we forget why they left. And somewhere deep in space, aboard the silent fleet, Captain Rhea whispered to herself, they'll call this surrender. She said, but it's not theirs, it's ours. We surrendered our peace long ago. Now we're just keeping the universe from destroying what's left. The stars ahead shimmered, the engines hummed, and humanity sailed into the dark. Not triumphant, not cruel, but eternal, carrying the unbearable duty of peacekeepers who no longer believed in peace, because to the galaxy, it was the end. But to them, it was just another day. The stars burned quiet again, dim and cold, their light stretching through the wounded galaxy like faint memories that refused to fade. The great wars had ended not with peace treaties or speeches, but with silence so heavy it felt eternal. The Galactic Council lay in ruins, their cities dark, their fleets broken, and their pride scattered across the void. Yet among the ashes of what once was, a strange calm began to rise. Not hope, not joy, just the quiet realization that survival was now mercy. The historian Saran stood on the balcony of the council's shattered hall, his aged eyes watching the distant lights of the human fleet fading into hyperspace trails. He whispered to himself, they came not to rule, not to kill, but to remind. His voice trembled with something between awe and grief. Remind us of what power means when it's born from pain. Behind him, the few remaining delegates murmured in low voices, their arguments no longer filled with arrogance, only fear and shame. We can't rebuild like before, said one. They'll destroy us again. No, replied another softly. They didn't destroy. They cleaned. Cleaned? The first shouted bitterly. You call that cleaning? They erased empires. They silenced billions. Saran turned, his gaze calm but sharp. They erased greed. They silenced chaos. And you call that wrong because it stripped away what you built with lies. His words fell heavy, and none dared answer. For the first time in centuries, the council chamber felt smaller, like a classroom before a lesson too painful to face. Saran looked toward the great mural above the dais, depicting the galaxy united under false harmony, the faces of the species who once laughed at humanity, now cracked and fading. We learned too late, he said softly. That peace without accountability is nothing but noise. Far from the council world, aboard the Eidolon, humanity's flagship moved through the silent void. A dark giant gliding through starlight, its hull bearing the scars of 1,000 forgotten wars. Inside, the air was calm, the hum of the engine steady like the heartbeat of something ancient. Captain Rhea Dalton sat at her command chair, her eyes distant, the faint glow of holographic reports reflected on her face. Her crew worked in silence, movements automatic, precise. But beneath that order there was a weariness that no technology could erase. Commander Voss approached her, carrying a small data pad. "Council transmissions have stopped," he said. "No new threats detected. The galaxy's quiet." Rhea nodded slowly. "Too quiet?" she murmured. "They think silence means safety, but it never lasts." Voss hesitated. "Maybe this time it will." She looked up at him, tired but kind. "You still believe in maybe Voss?" He gave a faint smile. "Someone has to." She rose from her chair, walking toward the viewport, her hands clasped behind her back, the stars reflected in her eyes like tiny ghosts. "Do you know what my father told me when I joined the fleet?" she asked softly. "He said peace isn't something you win, it's something you maintain, and maintaining it means cleaning up after everyone else's mess." She looked at him. "That's what we are now, janitors of the galaxy." Her voice carried both sorrow and pride. Voss nodded slowly. "Janitors who can erase planets?" he said, trying to make her smile, but her face didn't change. "It's not power that scares them," she said. "It's discipline. They see something they can't corrupt, and they hate it." She turned back to the stars. "We've become the very thing they pretended to be." Down in the lower decks, the younger crew members whispered among themselves, their voices soft, their faces pale. One asked, "Do you think they'll ever forgive us?" Another laughed quietly, not cruelly, just broken. "Forgive us? They should thank us. If we didn't stop them, they would have destroyed each other long before now." "Still," the first whispered, "I don't think I'll ever sleep right again." The older mechanic nearby looked up from his console. "No one who serves in silence ever does," he said. "But we sleep knowing the galaxy keeps spinning because we stayed awake." The room fell quiet again, only the hum of the core filling the air. Back on the council world, Saran gathered what remained of his records. Data crystals containing the history of the war, but as he stored them, he stopped, staring at the last entry, a transmission from Earth recorded centuries ago, a human voice speaking to the council before their exile. "We leave because we see what's coming," the voice had said, calm and full of sorrow. "You call us dangerous because we've seen the edge and stepped back. You will call it arrogance, we call it restraint." The recording ended, and Saran whispered, "They warned us?" He played it again, letting the sound fill the empty hall. The words echoed like prophecy. "You will fear what you don't understand, and you will understand too late." He closed his eyes, tears slipping down his cheeks. "And we did." On the Eidolon, the sensors detected faint transmissions. Distress calls, colonies asking for help to rebuild, to understand, to atone. Rhea listened to one of them. The voice of a child crying on a distant world, begging for protection from pirates now that their empires were gone. She sat in silence, listening, and then said softly, "Plot a course." Voss turned to her, confused. "To that system? It's small, unimportant." "So was Earth once," she said quietly. "We don't choose who deserves peace, Voss. We just make sure no one takes it away." He nodded, and for the first time in months, she saw something human in his eyes again. The fleet turned toward the small planet, engines igniting in silent blue arcs, the light spreading across the hull like the reflection of a coming dawn. As they approached, the pirates scattered before even a single warning shot, running from the shadows of the ships that carried the Terran crest. On the surface, the children looked up at the sky, seeing the massive shapes gliding above the clouds, and one of them whispered, "The angels came back." The mother beside him shook her head. "Not angels," she said softly. "Custodians." As the Eidolon hovered in orbit, Rhea stood once again at the viewport, watching the world below begin to breathe again. Lights flickering back to life in the cities, smoke rising from repaired reactors, life returning to places once forgotten. She spoke softly, almost to herself. "We destroy to rebuild, we rebuild to remind." and then we vanish so they forget, and the cycle begins again. Voss stepped beside her, his voice low. You sound like you've done this before. She smiled faintly, but her eyes were wet. Maybe we have. Maybe this isn't the first galaxy that forgot what we are. Far away, in the stillness between stars, the fleet of humanity drifted onward, thousands of silent ships moving through the dark like guardians in exile. No songs, no banners, just quiet, endless vigilance. The galaxy would tell stories of them. Call them monsters, gods, saviors, but the truth was simpler. They were human, and humanity had learned its lesson through centuries of blood and loss, the lesson no one else wanted to learn. That mercy without strength is hollow, and strength without purpose is madness, so they became the balance, the unspoken law between chaos and extinction. And in the halls of the Dead Council, as Saran's last message was recorded, his final words were carried on a signal he knew no one would ever answer. They will forget again. He whispered. They always do, but when they do, when greed returns and arrogance rises, they'll come back, not with rage, not with hatred, but with duty, because for them, order isn't cruelty, it's compassion, and that compassion is what terrifies the galaxy most. Back on the Eidolon, the crew prepared for the next mission. The lights dimmed, engines powered up. Rhea closed her eyes, whispering to herself. We keep the peace not because we love it, but because someone has to. Her hand brushed the control console, and the stars outside bent once more as the fleet vanished into hyperspace, leaving behind a galaxy humbled and silent. A galaxy that would heal in the shadow of those it once mocked, and far across the cosmos. As worlds rebuilt and generations passed, the legend of humanity grew again, whispered by those who never saw them, feared by those who remembered, and prayed for by those who understood, because every civilization, sooner or later, learned the same truth. The galaxy called it overkill, but humanity just called it a normal day. The galaxy slept in uneasy peace, stars flickering over worlds that still whispered humanity's name like a prayer they didn't understand. Centuries of arrogance had ended in a silence that now stretched across the void, broken only by the hum of rebuilding machines and the sigh of civilizations that finally realized how small they truly were. The Galactic Council no longer stood in marble halls, its chambers now empty, vines crawling across the stone where once pride and laughter echoed. In their place were young leaders who spoke softly, who ruled carefully, always watching the stars as if afraid the humans might return. The word Terran had become a warning in every tongue, carved into walls, printed on data scrolls, taught to children not as history but as faith. They spoke of the day the skies fell quiet and the destroyers of empires walked away without a sound. And in that silence the galaxy began to change, slowly, humbly, as if trying to become something worthy of being left alive. On a forgotten world near the edge of the Orion Spur, the old historian Saran sat alone beneath the shade of a broken monument, his hands trembling as he wrote his final record. His voice cracked with age but carried the weight of memory. I have lived long enough to see the rise of peace and the death of pride, he whispered. I have watched our arrogance turn to dust and our enemies become our teachers. He paused, looking toward the night sky. They didn't destroy us because they hated us. They saved us because we could not save ourselves, he smiled faintly. And they never asked for thanks. The recording light blinked as his frail hand reached to switch it off. Humans never wanted to be gods, he said softly. But the galaxy made them into one. His voice faded into static, and the wind carried his final words into the endless dark. Far away, aboard the Eidolon, the Terran fleet drifted through the void, silent and endless, its black hull absorbing starlight like a shadow stretched across eternity. Captain Rhea Dalton stood at the command deck, her face lit by the glow of 1,000 stars. Her crew moved quietly behind her. No shouts, no urgency, just quiet focus. The mission was done, the galaxy stable, and yet the weight on her shoulders felt heavier than ever. Commander Voss approached, his voice soft. We've done it, he said. The systems are rebuilding. No wars, no rebellions, not even crime in the outer sectors. She gave a faint nod, her eyes still distant. And yet it doesn't feel like victory, she said. It feels like waiting. Voss tilted his head. Waiting for what? She looked at him, her voice low. For them to forget. He exhaled slowly. leaning on the console beside her. You really think they'll ever try again? It's what they do, she said. The galaxy always forgets the price of peace until someone pays it again. She looked back at the stars. And when that day comes, we'll be there. Her reflection on the glass seemed older, sadder, but unbroken. You know, Voss said quietly, sometimes I wonder if we scare them because we're too strong, or because we remind them what strength actually looks like. She smiled faintly. Maybe both, she replied. They called us violent because we didn't hide the cost of doing what had to be done. The ship's intercom crackled softly. A young officer's voice came through. Captain, message from Earth Command. They request fleet status. Rhea took a deep breath. Report. Operation complete. All systems under control. Any new directives, Captain? The officer asked. She paused, then said, Stand by for standby? The channel closed. Voss raised an eyebrow. Stand by for standby? She smirked. Means do nothing? Wait for trouble? You think trouble's coming? Always, she said, turning away, her voice calm. The universe doesn't like balance, Voss. It always leans toward chaos. We're just the counterweight. In the mess hall, the crew gathered in small clusters, quiet laughter echoing softly. Someone played an old Earth song through a tiny speaker, static-filled but warm, a melody that hadn't been heard in centuries. For a brief moment, the ship felt alive again, human again. One young navigator looked out the viewing window and whispered, Do you ever wonder if they tell stories about us down there? The engineer beside him chuckled. Stories? They probably scare their kids with them. Good. The navigator said, Fear keeps people honest. Another added, Fear also keeps them distant. That's the point. Came a quiet voice from the back. It was Rhea, standing in the doorway, a rare hint of warmth in her tone. As long as they fear us, they won't repeat our mistakes. Later, in her private quarters, she sat at her desk, the faint blue glow of Earth's emblem flickering on a small hollow screen. She stared at it for a long moment before opening a message log, her voice soft and tired. Fleet Command. This is Captain Rhea Dalton, final entry. Operation Overkill concluded, Galaxy status. Stable, minimal resistance, Terran presence no longer required. She paused, her eyes falling to the floor. I wish I could say this felt like peace, but it doesn't. Peace is supposed to feel light, this feels heavy, maybe that's what peace really is. A weight we carry so no one else has to. She hesitated, then added. If anyone ever listens to this, remember one thing, we didn't do it because we wanted to, we did it because no one else would. She ended the recording, the system chimed softly, entry saved. Outside the viewport, the stars stretched into long ribbons of light as the Eidolon prepared for hyperspace. Rhea stood once more at the bridge, watching the universe blur. Engage, she said quietly, and the ship leapt into the void, silent, steady, alone. Behind them, countless worlds turned slowly beneath the stars, rebuilding, repenting, forgetting. Their skies no longer full of war, only of wonder, and yet, somewhere deep in their hearts, the memory of humanity lingered like a scar. Reminder written not in words, but in silence. Generations later, children across the galaxy would look up at the night sky and ask their parents about the stories. The stories of the ghosts who came from the blue planet, the ones who ended all wars without a word. Some parents called them monsters, others called them guardians, but the elders, the ones who still remembered, would shake their heads and whisper. They weren't gods or demons, they were just humans, and when they move, the stars themselves stand still. And in that whispered truth lay the legacy of Earth, a legacy too vast for time to erase. In the archives of the New Council, long after Saran's death, a young archivist found one of his final recordings, dusty and almost lost to age. She restored the file and listened. The old man's voice crackled through the static. The galaxy called it overkill, he said. But they never understood, to humanity, overkill is just another word for certainty. They don't fight to prove they can. They fight to make sure they never have to again. The archivist sat in silence long after the message ended, staring at the stars through the great window, and for the first time she understood why the humans never came back. They didn't need to, their silence was louder than any army, and far beyond the galactic rim, where no starlight reached, the Terran fleet drifted in the endless dark, engines dim, systems at rest, waiting, patient as ever. The humans aboard did not age. They did not tire. They simply waited, keepers of balance in a universe that would one day forget again. Captain Ria's final words echoed through the halls like a lullaby. Rest easy. The galaxy sleeps, and for once, it's quiet. Her voice faded into the hum of the ship's core, a sound softer than breathing, and as the Eidolon vanished beyond the edge of known space, only the stars remained to bear witness to the truth that humanity had not destroyed the galaxy. They had saved it in the only way they knew, with mercy colder than fire, with silence sharper than any blade, because when the galaxy called it overkill, humanity just called it a normal day.